Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Andrew Mushbaugh, and I'm here with my co-host, Trent DeBruin. And today we're going to be walking through a condensed 5-step process of how you can create a financial plan. And the term financial plan can be intimidating and make it feel like you have to predict and plan every aspect of your financial future. But know that at a basic level, a financial plan is just a framework and system to ensure that the way you're managing and leveraging your financial resources is aligned with what's most important to you. And also know that life changes and you can't predict every aspect of the future, so your financial plan isn't set in stone and it evolves and adapts over time. And when thinking about all the different aspects of your financial life, it can be overwhelming of where to start or how to address all the different areas. And so a good way to think about this process is a lot like packing and moving. No one enjoys doing this, but you do need to have some type of system. And my wife and I are actually in the process of building a house, and so we're going through this process right now. And similar to creating a financial plan, you won't be able to get everything done all at once, and so you need to have a plan of how to tackle the project. And so to give an overview of the 5 steps of how to create your financial plan, step 1 is to get organized. Step 2 is set and quantify your goals. Step 3 is to understand your cash flow. Step 4 is how to save for your different goals. Step 5 is how to prioritize and take action. And I know I probably shouldn't complain about having to move a couple miles away, given you had to pack and move from Chicago with 2 little boys, a pregnant wife, and also while building a house.
Yeah, I've definitely hit my quota of doing that for a while.
Yeah, definitely would agree. So looking at that first step of getting organized, you want to start by taking inventory of your current financial life. And it's really helpful to know where you are right now as a starting point, because later in the process, it helps you figure out what you need to do to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And it can often be one of the toughest parts of the process for a couple reasons. The first one is taking that first step with anything is often the toughest. And number 2, if you're like most people, you tend to accumulate different pieces of your financial life over time. Investment account here, an insurance policy there, a mortgage, but you don't necessarily have a system for how to track and organize everything. So simply gathering the pieces can take some time and effort, especially for a busy physician. And so when it comes to that first step in creating a financial plan, why don't you walk through what people should be focused on?
Yeah, there are a few main areas that you want to think about here. And the first is just to understand your net worth. And net worth is the difference between what you own, so your assets, and what you owe, your liabilities, or your debt. And it's an important indicator to track over time since it tends to be a good measure of wealth and it shows you how well you're actually converting your income into wealth. So when understanding your net worth, the first thing you want to do is gather all your different assets. Things like investment accounts, 529 plans, bank accounts, the whole list. And then you'll also want to gather your liabilities or your debt, mortgage, student loans, car loans. And the difference between these two is your net worth. And there are 2 different ways that you can grow your net worth. One is by saving and investing and growing your assets, and the other is by paying down debt. We know for a lot of the younger physicians out there, even reaching a net worth of 0 can feel like a victory since it means those student loans are either finally paid off or close to it. And the second area to focus on when getting organized is to understand your insurance. And insurance is what protects you against all the risks in your financial life. Things like death, disability, lawsuit, car accident. And it's really important to know which insurance policies you have because that helps you understand whether there are any gaps in your coverage that you need to fill. So what you want to do here is just list out all of your different insurance policies so you have an inventory of them. And the third area is to know your estate plan. And when people hear estate plan, they tend to think of taxes and how to save taxes when you pass assets to your heirs. But for most people, that's actually not what it's about. The current estate tax exemption is $11.6 million per individual or $23.2 million per married couple. So because of that, few people will have to worry about estate taxes, at least under the current laws. So rather than taxes, for most people, estate planning is more about what happens to those assets and insurance policies that you identified in parts 1 and 2 of getting organized, and also indicating who takes care of any minor children if something were to happen to you. So here, what you'll want to do is gather any estate documents that you do have in place. And the common ones include things like a will, trust, and powers of attorney for healthcare and property. And you may have all of these or you may have none, but whatever you do have, gather those documents so you can see what you currently have in place. And you'll also want to check who you have listed as the beneficiaries for your retirement accounts and life insurance policies, because you want to make sure they match up with your current preferences, and preferences do tend to change over time, so you always want to make sure those are up to date. And we know this first step of creating your financial plan and going through and getting organized isn't the most fun, but it's really important to have it as a starting point. And we often find that clients feel better and they feel more at peace just by knowing these details and having the full picture when it comes to their financial lives. And we've also had a number of cases where clients ended up finding a rogue account with a few $1,000s in it, or even a loan that they'd forgotten about over the years.
Yeah, it's definitely more fun finding money than a loan.
Absolutely. So once someone has everything organized, why don't you talk through the process of then setting and quantifying those goals?
Sure. Yeah, the next step is breaking down what you want to address. And most people have a hard time thinking about this big idea of goals, which is why we are proponents of breaking them down into manageable pieces based on time horizon. And also the term goals can sometimes be a bit intimidating for people. So another way to think of it is simply things that you want to do with your money or accomplish in your financial life. And we like to break those goals down into three main categories. You have short-term goals, which are less than 3 years away, medium-term goals, which are between 3 and 10 years away, and then finally long-term goals, which are 10 years or further away. And you can also use our financial checkup, which we'll have a link to in the show notes, to get an idea of what some of your goals can be. But an example of some of those goals, if you're looking short-term, this could be establishing an emergency fund, consolidating retirement accounts, getting an estate plan in place. Whereas medium-term goals might be buying your forever house or paying for college for your kids. And the long-term goals, the biggest one is retirement, but there's other ones that could be paying for a wedding down the road or buying a vacation home. But it's really important to recognize that there's no right or wrong answer here, and different people's goals can be wildly different from each other because each person's goals are going to be driven by their personal values and their vision for life. So one person might love their job and have a goal of retiring at age 70, while another is counting down the days and wants to retire at 50. But it's also important to know that the more specific you can get when identifying and defining your goals, the more helpful it is. And not only in terms of assigning a cost to each goal, which we'll talk about next, but also in terms of actually achieving them. And like we said, it can be overwhelming to try and think about all your goals for even people that have an idea of what they want to accomplish, still often fail to take that next step of figuring out what's required, at least financially speaking, to meet those goals. And so what's the starting point for quantifying some of those goals?
Well, it's helpful to follow that same approach of looking at your goals by time horizon. So what you can do is start with your short-term goals and think about how much each of them will cost. So if you want to build up an emergency fund, how much cash do you feel comfortable with? If you're saving for a down payment for your forever home, what size down payment will you need? And once you go through that process with the short-term goals, you can then repeat it with your medium and then your longer-term goals. And for some of those bigger goals like retirement or paying for college, it can be a little harder to know the cost off the top of your head. And we use financial planning software when figuring these things out, but it's possible to get a rough idea just using back of the napkin math or even some of the calculators that you can find online. A rough idea is really all you need at this point. Not everyone's going to know the exact answers to start, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, when it comes to financial planning, it's an always evolving process, and you don't need to know the exact dollar amounts. But the idea is just to start thinking in rough terms what each of your goals will cost so you can then go back into what's required to actually get there. And this process definitely takes some time, but it's really helpful in giving you a good comparison of where you are today and where you want to be in the future. And we'll have future episodes that dive into different goals and how exactly to save for them. But for now, the important thing is just to understand the process.
Yeah, it's a great point on this needing to be a process. And it's a lot like using your GPS when you're driving on a family vacation down to Florida. You'll put in the directions of where you want to go, but we all know that things come up along the way and you're certainly going to have to make adjustments.
Especially with little kids and more bathroom breaks than you expected.
Yeah.
So at this point, we know it can be overwhelming to look at the cost of all your different goals and realize what's actually required to meet all of them. So let's touch on the idea of cash flow and talk a little bit about how to actually save for the goals.
Yeah, so a simple definition is this is the money that's left over after paying income taxes. So said differently, it's what you have left over to either save or spend. So for example, if you made $200,000, pay $50,000 in taxes, you have $150,000 of cash flow. And this is what you're going to use to either save and fund those various goals. So if you spend more, then you're going to have less to save for your goals. And so we think about cash flow like a pitcher of water, and all the uses of your cash flow as different cups. And so those cups can be things like saving for retirement, college, building an emergency fund, or getting an estate plan in place. And when thinking about your cash flow as a water pitcher, you can only use as much of the water you have in the pitcher to fill up all those different cups. And if you're like most people, you won't be able to fully fill up all those different cups. So you then need to prioritize which cups or goals are most important and start by filling those up first. And think about this water pitcher process as a very fluid process. You may decide in 1 year to take a family vacation, knowing that you're going to save less for retirement or push off on a home renovation. And we all have a finite amount of cash flow to use each year, so you need to prioritize what is most important for you. And it's a balancing act of spending and enjoying today while ensuring that you're saving enough for some of those future goals.
It seems like that tends to be the hardest part often, just striking that right balance. I think we all know those people who are super savers, but that can come at the cost of potentially missing out on enjoying your money today. But on the flip side, we also know those people who are overspending and unfortunately are going to be in for a surprise when it comes to retirement or trying to pay for things like college.
Absolutely. Once we have that understanding of cash flow and how that pays into saving for some of those different goals, how should we think about determining the best way of saving for those goals?
So this next step, it's all about taking those dollar values for your different goals that you figured out in step 2, quantifying your goals, and translating them into how much you actually need to be saving and investing each year to achieve them. And we always recommend starting with the retirement or financial independence goal first, in terms of understanding how much you need to save each year for it and making sure that you're actually doing that year in and year out. And the reason for that is this tends to be the goal that's the furthest away in terms of timeline and also the most expensive. So because of those two things, it's the easiest to procrastinate on. Now, how much you need to save each year will be different for everyone, just depending on when you want to retire or become financially independent and the lifestyle you want to live. But once you know that you're saving enough for retirement, you want to then look back on all the goals you listed in the second step and what you estimated they'll cost to back into what's required to save each year. So for example, if one of your goals was setting up that estate plan, you might know that it'll cost around $3,000, but that'll be a one-off expense. If you want to build up that emergency fund, maybe $15,000 is the target you want to get to. And once you hit that goal is checked off. But then you might have other goals like saving for college or a down payment for a dream home that are going to require saving year after year. Maybe it's $10,000 a year for college or $40,000 a year for the down payment for the next 3 or 4 years. But once you've gone through and done this for each of the different goals, you want to compare what you're currently saving for each of them to what's required, because that's going to show you the gap for each if there is one.
Yeah, and like we talked about before, most people are surprised at the gap between what they are currently saving and what's actually required to meet those goals. And especially how there can be a big trade-off between those different competing items and how you're saving for those. And it reminds me of buying a house in Ann Arbor, where you often have to decide what's most important between location and the size of your home or yard that you'd have. It's going to be different for everyone, but you have to figure out what's most important for you.
So how do you go about that, since you can't have everything all at once and you have to prioritize? What's a good way to think about prioritizing the different goals?
Yeah, if you're thinking back to that water pitcher analogy with your cash flow, you can decide either A, you want to increase the size of the pitcher. So that means that you're going to spend less or increase your income. Or B, you need to reduce the number or sizes of those glasses. And so that means you could adjust your goals. So you may decide you don't need to take a vacation this year, or you're okay retiring a year later. Or maybe you'd be okay with your kids taking on some student loans to pay for college. The big thing to know is that with each of those options, what you decide is going to be a personal decision. And for most people, it tends to be a combination of trying to spend a little bit less or also adjusting certain goals based on the reality that you can't fully fund all of them. And we always recommend people literally write out a list of the goals of theirs that are most important. And we have clients that say retiring at a certain age is non-negotiable, and others are okay working longer. The key is just to be intentional based on what's most important to you. And it's also important to note that certain goals like getting an estate plan or purchasing insurance aren't a fun use of cash flow, but they are necessary to protect your loved ones. And after you go through the list and contemplate some of the trade-offs, you want to then put together a specific list of action items you can take care of this year. For example, you may decide that the most important items are retiring at age 55, getting an estate plan, and paying for college for the kids. So you want to figure out what's required for each of those and then start to save for those specific goals before addressing some of the other ones. For most people, we find a balanced approach works best. We save a little bit toward several different goals and make progress in different areas. But as we mentioned, this is a fluid process and your priorities can change year to year.
So once you have that game plan and priorities in place, then it's all about taking action to actually start making progress toward the goals. And for savings-based goals like retirement or college savings, It's about making sure that the right amount of your income is being directed to the right account each month. And it's often helpful to automate your savings. So what you can do is set up an automatic monthly transfer for each of the goals. And what that does is it removes willpower from the equation, which significantly increases the likelihood that you'll actually stick to your savings plan over time. And for the non-savings goals, like consolidating old retirement accounts, buying insurance, setting up that estate plan, it's often about simply setting aside the time to do it, which we know is easier said than done with a busy schedule, but there's always enough time for anything if you make it a high enough priority. And getting your financial house in order, it does take time, and patience is important as you're going through and addressing all the different areas of your financial life. When it comes to financial planning and the process of reaching your goals, you really can't underestimate the power of time and how consistent incremental actions really add up over the years.
Yeah, and the idea of taking small actions can feel like you're not making a dent, but I love the short parable from Atomic Habits about the one coin. And the question is, can one coin make you rich? If 10 coins are not enough to make a man rich, what if you add one coin? What if you add another and another? Finally, you have to say that no one can be rich unless one coin can make him so. And the power of saving and investing and making progress isn't the one coin, but the years of saving one coin and making progress toward those goals. And so in summary of the overview of the 5-step process of getting your financial plan in shape, step 1 is to get organized. Step 2 is set and quantify your goals. Step 3 is to understand your cash flow. Step 4 is understanding how to save for those goals. And finally, step 5 is to prioritize and take action. And as we mentioned, we have a downloadable resource on our website called the Financial Checkup, which helps with this process. And if you're interested, you can find it in the show notes, or you can download it from the resources page on our website at mdwmllc.com. And if you do that, it's accompanied by an email sequence that walks through and explains each of these steps. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. We hope you have a few action items that you can walk away with of how you can start to prioritize the process of creating your financial plan. If you have any feedback, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And we certainly want to make sure that this content is as relevant and helpful for you as possible. So we appreciate any suggestions. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show or have an idea for a topic, feel free to email us at info@mdwmllc.com. Our plan is to do some mailbag type episodes in the future as we gather questions from our listeners. And also, if you have suggestions for guests, please pass those along as well. We always enjoy getting to meet new people and welcome the chance to talk to anyone who can share a useful and valuable perspective for our audience. Take care, everyone, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.